five Gospels, of course, is the new edition of the Gospels published by the Jesus Seminar very recently. And what is unique about the five Gospels is that it prints the words of Jesus in four different colors: red, pink, gray, and black, according to whether or not fellows of the seminar thought those words really went back to Jesus. Now, that's all the general explaining I think I need to do. So let me go on now to talk about what those colors represent and how I'm going to use them today. Most generally, those colors represent a measurement of the degree of consensus amongst scholars about the sayings of Jesus. That is, within the Jesus Seminar, we don't have any illusion that we're really deciding whether or not Jesus said those things. What we can do is we can measure the degree of agreement amongst us as to whether or not we think he said those things. So the colors represent a consensus of contemporary scholarship as represented within the Jesus Seminar. Red and pink, the two most positive votes, represent a pretty high degree of positive consensus that Jesus really said that. As most of you know, the Jesus Seminar is a fairly skeptical group, and so for something to make it into pink or red is to say, we really think this goes back to Jesus. The other end of the spectrum, black, represents a fairly strong negative consensus. It means we're pretty much agreed that that material does not go back to Jesus. And let me briefly comment about what drops out by being placed in the black category. Two things in particular. One of the things that drops out is what I call the popular image of Jesus and what Dom Crossan calls the canonical image of Jesus. It is that image of Jesus as a person who thought of himself as the Son of God or the Messiah. It is that image of Jesus as one who thought of himself as dying for the sins of the world, that is, that he saw his own intention or purpose as being that. And it is an image of Jesus in which his message was primarily about himself and the importance of believing in him. All of that is in black, according to the voting of the Jesus Seminar. That whole popular image of Jesus disappears as a historical image of Jesus. The other major thing that drops out, because it's in the black category, is the apocalyptic understanding of Jesus that dominated much of this century's scholarship from the time of Albert Schweitzer until relatively recently. And the apocalyptic, I know that's a technical term, the apocalyptic image of Jesus is that understanding of Jesus which sees him as expecting the coming of the kingdom of God in the very near future, which will involve a radical change in the state of affairs in this world, or even for all practical purposes, the end of this world, not the end of the physical universe, but such a dramatic change that one may speak of it as the end of the world. Scholarship throughout much of this century thought that that was the heart of Jesus' message, the imminence of the kingdom of God, the imminence of the coming of the apocalyptic Son of Man. The Jesus Seminar does not think that. All of that material is black. So both the popular image of Jesus and the dominant scholarly image of Jesus disappear within the framework of the Jesus Seminar's decisions. That leaves one category, one color left for me to speak about, namely gray. Gray is a very different category, and it's a very interesting category. Most often, I think, gray does not mean the consensus is gray. Most often, I think, gray does not mean the consensus is mildly negative. Let me explain that now a little bit. One of the official meanings of gray in the seminar's voting is, well, maybe. That is, it expresses uncertainty. You know, perhaps this goes back to Jesus, perhaps this doesn't. Another way of expressing why gray is such an interesting and different category is to point out that a passage printed in gray might very well mean the votes were all over the place on this one. Let me illustrate that quickly. If a saying received 10 red votes, 10 pink votes, 10 gray votes, and 11 black votes, the saying would be printed in gray. Obviously, in that case, it would not mean the consensus is gray. In that case, it means the votes are all over the place, the Jesus Seminar is very uncertain about this, or maybe even deeply divided about this. Now, I stress that because of the obvious thing. It would be a mistake to see gray as consistently a mildly negative vote. That's not what it means. Now, it also means a couple of other things. The gray material may point to the immediate future direction of Jesus' research. This is the material that we're uncertain about. This is the material that needs further study. And it will be really interesting to see if the next 10 years bring further study of precisely the gray material. The other quick comment about gray is this. A sketch of the historical Jesus will need to make some use of gray material. Gray is the quarry from which further rocks are to be hewn. To put that only slightly differently, if you try to construct a sketch of the historical Jesus using only red and pink, it'll be much too narrow a portrait, too emaciated a portrait. Red and pink tells us what we're most certain about. But if you try to do a picture with just red and pink, you end up with an understanding of Jesus that is completely inadequate for accounting for what happened around him and after him. Some of gray must be included in an adequate portrait of Jesus. And as I do my own portrait of Jesus today, I will in fact be making use of some gray material and seeking to justify that as I go along. Well, all of that is the introduction. Now let me provide you briefly with a roadmap of the 4 talks, and then I'll move immediately into the focus of the talk. This talk